making a lot of progress. The war in Ukraine demonstrates the importance of NATO and the European Union working closely together, and NATO allies and the EU has delivered unprecedented support to Ukraine. Just over the last months, we have delivered heavy battle tanks, the Leopards, the UK British Challengers, but also now the US Abrams. And then the last weeks, the United Kingdom has delivered advanced long-range cruise missiles, which are already making a difference on the battlefield. And then, of course, over the last days, we have heard an announcement from several allies, including the United States, United Kingdom, and several European allies, that they will start the training of pilots on NATO standard modern Western fighter jets. This demonstrates our readiness to stand by Ukraine and to be prepared for a long haul. But of course, to continue our support to Ukraine, we also need to ramp up production of weapons and of ammunition. And therefore, one of the issues I will discuss with the defense ministers is how we can work even more closely together, NATO and the European Union, on increasing and strengthening the transatlantic industrial base. I welcome the work the EU is doing. This is making a difference. It's helping our joint efforts. At the same time, what NATO does is also critical because we are setting the standards to ensure interoperability, interchangeability. We have the NATO guidelines, the capability targets for each and every ally, and we are now in the process of revising the guidelines, the capability targets for battle-decisive ammunition, which includes also 155 ammunition, which is a critical piece of ammunition in the war in Ukraine. And we are engaging closely with industry. I met them several times. We have engaged with them, and I see now that more and more NATO allies are actually signing contracts, which is what we need to ensure that production actually increases. We need to avoid creating new barriers between NATO allies. We need to strengthen the transatlantic industrial base to ensure that we can both replenish our own stocks, to ensure our own deterrence and defense, but also to continue to support Ukraine. Then another topic which was also related to the war in Ukraine is the protection of critical infrastructure. We have seen the vulnerability of infrastructure, especially undersea infrastructure. We have established a joint task force with the European Union, NATO, and the European Union on resilience, including infrastructure. NATO has established a cell at NATO to coordinate efforts of different countries, different allies, and the public and the private sector to step up what we do to protect the critical infrastructure. And I expect also new announcements and decisions at the upcoming NATO summit. So then I'm ready for your questions.
Right. Secretary General, could I just ask on ammunition, which you mentioned there, are both the European Union and NATO allies doing everything possible to get enough ammunition to Ukraine in the time frame that Ukraine needs it? Are you confident about the EU three-track approach? Is there anything more you will be encouraging them to do today?
It is extremely important that we increase the production of ammunition. This is something we have been focused on for some time now, since last fall when we had the first meetings at NATO. I also met with Minister Kuleba and High Representative Borrell and me. We met some months ago and agreed also to coordinate our efforts between Ukraine, EU and NATO even more closely, because it is always, of course, important to discuss new platforms, planes, battle tanks, air defense systems. But as important, or perhaps even more important, is it to ensure that all the systems which are already in Ukraine work and function as they should. And to do so, they need ammunition, they need fuel, spare parts, maintenance. and repair capacity. So the sustainment, which also then include ammunition, is absolutely critical. This is now a war of attrition, and a war of attrition becomes a battle of logistics, and then production, ramp-up production is absolutely key. So, of course, we are always focusing on what more can we do to ensure that we engage even more with industry, that we mobilize even more contracts. I have decided to invite representatives from the defense industry from both sides of the Atlantic to our defense ministerial meeting next month, to an event where we will engage directly with all the ministers and the defense industry. The EU is, of course, also invited. Ukraine is invited to the same event with High Representative Borrell, but also Commissioner Breton, to ensure the fullest possible engagement with the defense industry. In NATO, of course, we have tried and tested structures for production and for also joint procurement. We have done joint procurement, meaning allies buying ammunition and weapons together for many, many years. We have big ongoing projects. Some of them are organized by NATO allies as groups. Many of them are organized through the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, the NSBA, and there are ongoing projects now. And I think, of course, it's important to use all the tools available, including the well-established NATO structures, to coordinate and to ensure joint procurement and to sign the contract, so the industry is willing to invest and ramp up production.
And on the fighter jets, Mr. Stoltenberg, made fighter jets, and secondly, do you have any idea of a timetable? When will the pilots be trained, and when will the first fighter jets be delivered to Ukraine?
I think it's a good idea, and I welcome the decision by several NATO allies, including Germany, to start training of pilots, because that gives us the opportunity, the possibility to make decisions on also delivery later on. I will leave it to individual allies to make announcement exactly about when they start training. But of course, also with the announcement by President Biden this weekend, the US being, of course, the main provider of, for instance, F-16s, and also announcing clearly that they will start training. This is an important step that partly will enable us to then deliver fighter jets at some stage, but also is sending a very clear signal that we are there for the long term, and that Russia cannot wait us out. And President Putin started this war. He can end this war, and we have to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Ukraine has the right of self-defense. They are defending themselves, and the right of self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. We help Ukraine to uphold that right. That's our right, to help them protect UN law, international law, against the war of aggression. That doesn't make NATO and NATO allies party to the conflict, but we are supporting Ukraine to defend themselves against a war of aggression, a brutal invasion by President Putin.
So you said Germany is training pilots? Is that true?
No, I was said that Germany are among the countries that have said that they are ready to look into the issue of training. If I'm misinformed, then I regret that.
No, we have the lady over here.
Viktor Orban said in an interview with Bloomberg that looking at the figures, looking at the surroundings, looking at the fact that NATO is not ready to send troops, it is obvious that there is no victory for poor Ukrainians on the battlefield. How would you comment on that?
Well, what we have demonstrated now is the willingness of NATO allies to really provide support to Ukraine. And we have seen that this support has been really decisive. President Putin made several big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine, partly because he totally underestimated the Ukrainians, their bravery, their determination, their courage, but also he totally underestimated NATO allies and partners when it comes to our willingness, our readiness to provide support to Ukraine, and this has enabled the Ukrainians to push back and to retake territory. We saw it in the north around Kiev, where they actually liberated a lot of territory. Then we saw it in the east and around Kharkiv, and then we saw it in the south, again Kherson. So the Ukrainians have already demonstrated the capability they have to liberate land, to push back the Russians, and the importance of the support they get from NATO allies. Then, of course, they need to do more, and that's exactly why we are stepping up our support. I just mentioned the battle tanks, the long-range cruise missiles, and now also training of pilots. And let me come back to exactly which nations which are training pilots. But anyway, several allies have announced that they are training pilots. So I'm absolutely confident that Ukraine has the capacity, the will, the courage, but also NATO allies have the commitment, the resolve to support them, so they can liberate and ensure that President Putin does not win this war.
Thank you very much, colleagues. That's all we have.
Thank you.
Jag vill fråga om vår försvarsminister Pål Jonsson pratade om ett ökande momentum när det gäller svenska medlemskapet till Vilniusmötet, att det finns ett ökat tryck. Vad är din just nu, hur skulle du beskriva läget när det gäller svenska medlemskapet?
Altså, jeg er helt trygg på at Sverige kommer til å bli medlem av NATO. Jeg kommer til å jobbe hardt for at det skal skje så raskt som mulig. Jeg kan jo selvsagt ikke love noe på vegne av nasjonalforsamlinger i NATO. Det er suverene nasjonalforsamlinger som til slutt må ratifisere også Sveriges medlemskapssøknad, og det er som dere vet 2 nasjonalforsamlinger som gjenstår. Men jeg gjør det jeg kan for at det skal skje så raskt som mulig. Det vi vet er at nå er snart det tyrkiske valget over. Det skaper en annen politisk situasjon i Tyrkia. Vi vet at Sverige kommer til å innføre nye lover fra 1. juni. De kommer til å tre i kraft, som det heter, antiterrorlover, som er viktige. Og vi vet selvfølgelig at også Vilnius-toppmøtet er en anledning for lederne til å møtes, slik vi møttes i Madrid. Og det skaper en anledning til å få til framgang. Som vi gjorde i Madrid, der vi, fordi vi møttes, satt i det samme rommet i mange timer. Magdalena Andersson, daværende statsminister, og Sauli Niinistö, og Erdogan og jeg og andre. Så de 3 tingene, valget over, nye lover på plass i Sverige, og det faktum at de møtes i Vilnius, det gir en mulighet. Det er ikke noe garanti, men det gir en mulighet. Så vil jeg også føye til at det som er sikkert, er at Sverige allerede er i en helt annen posisjon enn før de søkte. Vi må huske på at det at alle NATO-land inviterte Sverige til å bli medlem, det plasserte Sverige i en mye tryggere posisjon. Det er ikke slik at det ikke har skjedd noe siden vi startet denne prosessen. Sverige søkte i mai i fjor, allerede i juni fikk de statusen som invitert, og dermed deltar Sverige i møtene våre. De integreres i vårt politiske...
Men just det har vært en økende momentum.
Ja, men jeg har beskrevet de 3 poengene som jeg mener er viktige. Det ene er at valget er over, det andre er at Sverige trer nye lover i kraft, og det tredje er at vi møtes. Og det håper jeg kan bidra til at vi kan få en løsning. Igjen, jeg skal jobbe hardt for det, men jeg kan selvfølgelig ikke love noe. Nå må vi ta de andre. Ja.
Må jeg spørge ganske kort. Den danske statsminister Mette Frederiksen bliver nævnt som en mulig afløser for dig som NATO's generalsekretær. Hvad tænker du om Mette Frederiksen og hendes
arbejde? Jeg kommer ikke til å delta i den debatten overhodet. Jeg fokuserer på mitt ansvar som generalsekretær i NATO. Det er en krig i Europa, vi har toppmøte, og det er det jeg fokuserer på.
Viktor Orbán har uttalat sig idag om Sveriges inträde i NATO. Han säger att man inte kan säga ja till Sverige än för att det är diplomatiskt bråk mellan Ungern och Sverige. Vad säger du om det?
Altså, jeg anbefaler at Sverige ratifiseres av alle NATOs medlemsland. Det har jeg gjort hele tiden. Takk. No,